Thank you for coming. I'm here to learn just like you are. Actually, my perspective is more community organizing, and so I'm learning about the disability culture as well, and art, because I don't have an art background. So I think I just want to put that out there because we're all learning, wherever we're at. I mean, I'm sure you'll learn something from each other, so please feel free to ask questions or say anything, because we want this to be an interactive and enjoyable experience. So, or if you don't want to say anything, it's okay too. I can be that way in groups too. So, anyways, with ArtPrize, kind of what, for those of you who aren't familiar with DisArt, we had the DisArt Festival last April, and we consider that, DisArt team considers that a success. Jen Schwab was amazing with helping that with the Art Downtown and all the rest of the team and spreading the word. And so we want to continue this, and we've been fortunate enough to have some funding coming our way so that Chris and I can continue in making DisArt something that's sustainable. We have our goal for this year is, just to tell you, is just that, strategic planning and sustainability and building partnerships. So one of our most recent public partnership is with ArtPrize, which is very exciting for us. We already see how inclusion and disability awareness is part of people's consciousness in more and more conversations, and by being directly linked with ArtPrize, we're going to help them from internally think about things differently. How can we help make ArtPrize more inclusive in the future? Because that's a really big job, and thinking creatively about that. And then from our standpoint, we're a new organization. We could use some insight and support and thinking about sustainability and how to make that happen. So that's wonderful. And then we have other, we'll be checking in with you as we go with Avenue for the Arts and other organizations that Disability Advocates of Kent County, and just see how we can work together to make a difference in this community is really what we're about. And then to bring as many people to the experiences that people are creating in this community, so that with DisArt we hope to reach a broader audience and invite them in, because not everybody is always filled. Whatever the experience is happening is for them, and we want to say it is. Come as you are, and be who you are, and we'll all start to enjoy each other, I think, even more. So I have to put in the plug because the Arts for All Challenge with ArtPrize, I'm not sure if people have heard about that, is there's 10 organizations, arts and cultural organizations, as part of ArtPrize challenge. And what that is they identified local organizations that they gave a chance to raise some money. And we are thrilled to be part of that because it means that we're being identified as a cultural and an arts organization rather than a disability organization. It's okay. So anyways, so here's my plug. If you have $10 you want to give to us, we'd love it. If you have more, fabulous. If you can just continue to spread the word about the work that's happening and be part of it, that's great too. So we are currently in third place in this competition, and the first 3 places win prizes. So prize money. So there you go. Spread the word. Hey, ArtPrize folk. Welcome. Anyways, I think I've talked enough to allow more people to come, and we'll move on.
Okay, thanks everybody for coming. This is our second, and I want to say second aim. This is not on. Is it working? It's not really for you guys. It's for the video, and so just turn it my way, I guess. Yeah. Okay. Everybody hear me? Can everybody hear me? Okay. Okay. You good? Okay. All right. Good. So welcome to what would be our second, what we hope is an annual event. Last year, we did a critical discourse panel with ArtPrize, where we had the opportunity to look at some disability art examples in the ArtPrize contest, and it was a great success, and so we thought, well, we need to do it again. And so we wanted to do it on a little bit more of an intimate setting so that we can have more of a community conversation about it. And I think one of the things that DisArt is trying to do is offer some new eyes to look at things that perhaps we haven't thought about before. And certainly in Art Prize as an event, there are more and more perspectives growing as we are witnessing, for example, the Paul Collins Award that was awarded last night, and there's also a Latino Art Award that was awarded last night. And so more perspectives on what we're all looking at as a community, and certainly that's one of the things that DisArt is trying to do on many different levels. And as Jill mentioned, we are now partnering with Art Prize and helping all of us in the city think about issues of the body, issues of the mind, and how difference operates in a bunch of different categories. And so we are thrilled to have a discussion tonight with three experts in the field of art and disability. I'll introduce them immediately to my left. Petra Kuppers, here from the University of Michigan. Petra is a professor of women's studies and disability studies there at the university, and a well respected scholar in disability studies. To her left is Stephanie Height, artist, dancer, poet, also from Ann Arbor. And to her left, Elizabeth Van Aragon, Calvin College art history professor. And so they're here to talk about the art that we've all been looking at, and they're here to guide a conversation. And so let's open that up to everybody. If you want to speak, just raise your hand and we'll talk and really try to get to, well, quite honestly, how we can get to a moment where we can start looking through what we call a disability studies or disability culture perspective, a disability arts perspective. And so we'll model that for a couple of the examples, and then we'll just have a conversation about some of the other things. So let's go ahead and put the first slide up. Let's start at the top, right? The winner of Art Prize of the Juried Award, and a very interesting piece over at SiteLab. And I guess we'll start, if you could go to the next slide, Jill. I want to just show you some special slides. Petra and Stephanie got to swing today in the house. And so I wanted to show those images right away. But I'll go ahead and let you guys start talking about this and maybe introduce some of the concepts, okay?
All right, thank you so much. And thank you so much for having us. Jill, Chris, Lisa, it's just wonderful to be here. So great to see Art Prize here as well. Thank you once again for having us as part of this great event. It's always really exciting to be here, and it's really exciting to walk with this crew across Art Prize and just look at what is out there. So we put this together as we walk during the day. Last night and today we just put together, what can we look at from a disability culture, crip culture perspective? And so we ended up at SiteLab. And I was going to say, what we do is look at the art from the perspective of disabled audience members. What is it like to mark difference as an audience member, as someone who views art? And we are all also makers. We also are engaged in art practice. And of course, we found ourselves in that wonderful position that we met the guys from SiteLab, who very kindly let us go and try this out. So we did our half-hour slot, half-hour of swinging, and so we just thought we're going to tell you a little bit about how that felt, how it felt to be a disabled person in the house. And I'm going to Stephanie, and you start the experience, and then I take it back from there. Okay.
Okay, yeah, so this morning on this beautiful day, it was quite fun to be able to step literally into an art piece and to have the experience of activating it. Because when we first arrived, there were no people swinging in the house. So, you know, you had a lot of people looking and you couldn't read, and kind of, it was more of a conceptual piece of imagining. So actually going in and changing and reading the instructions for what we were supposed to do, and actually the act of putting on, you know, these white dresses and these red shoes and
Strange stuff.
right, yes, and there were like tights that went, you know, across, I guess, in place of a bra. I'm not sure, but anyhow, so that was that was a part. And then swinging, and the only instructions were to not engage with the audience, and to swing gently. So it wasn't any kind of, you know, acrobatic trying to get really as far as you could out the window or anything like that. Just a gentle swinging. And for me, my experience just starting, I noticed immediately physically, just like I was like, oh, it looks like there's so much ease, but actually, like right now, I can kind of feel my inner thighs, and I think my butt's gonna be a little sore tomorrow. So I was aware of that, and then as continuing, so for me, my disability, I live with bipolar disorder. And I actually, with that, have been hospitalized nearly 20 times. So for me, this being all in white and with these ropes and with people looking, you know, watching and looking, it also brought up feelings of that being observed. Even though I'm a performer and I performed a lot, so I'm used to that witnessing, but somehow the being all in white and this, you know, very red house with a pink outside and the staging of it. So I was thinking about that, about, you know, people looking in and then also me not engaging. And as far as from a disability culture perspective, you know, mental health difference, which is generally the broader term that some people use. You know, some people might say mental illness. I've just been introduced in the last year. I'm leaning more into this term of mental health difference. But often with that, it's not visible or apparent. It's a non-apparent disability. So it's interesting, the being in this position of having people look, and in the hospital, even though it's not apparent, that people are constantly, the doctors and workers there, looking at your activities and kind of charting them and what is different than whatever this norm is. So this kind of close observation, this vigilance. So I had that coming up for me as well. Recently we were in Amherst just last week, and I took a tour of Emily Dickinson's house and saw the white dress, the white dress that she wears. So then I had this other oh, this is the poetess, you know, so I had that coming through as well, which was, which was fun. And then also knowing that Petra was in the room next to me, even with the doors open, sightline wise, I couldn't see her, but just knowing that, you know, I had a companion, that we were both in this, even if it felt in some ways like there was some constriction involved, I was like, okay, it was somewhat that interdependence. I'm in this with someone. So anyhow, those are a few ideas. I'll pass this.
Thank you. Yeah, for me it was also a really strong experience, slightly different from what I thought it was going to be. And the slither of my experience that I will tell you about has to do with durational practice. And some of you might be familiar with that term. The history of performance art is often characterized through durational practice, where people expose themselves to something that is a hardship on the body. That usually means that something, you put yourself into a kind of trance state. You put yourself into a kind of liminal state, altered mind state, by putting pressure on your body, repeating something many, many times. Something sometimes it's literal. You put like stick needles into your face or something. You probably have seen some pictures of performance artists who do that, right? So these are all the kinds of practices that are very much associated with performance art. So being in that house, in this house that's pink from the outside, red inside, and then being one of these women swaying, it looks so light, but like Stephanie explained, it's actually really hard. If you do it literally for half an hour, it gets hard. It's not hard for the first 5 minutes. You all swung on swings, right? It's really nice for 5 minutes. It's really nice for 10 minutes. But then, it gets a bit hard. So we all, even women, I've been watching other women swing in there, and I see their legs, their arms tremble. It does take quite a bit of muscular pressure to do this. And you're in that place where you're half showing that and half not showing that. And that seemed to me a really interesting connection to disability culture too. To how we hide pain and exertion and tiredness, and yet how many of us also activate pain, exertion, and tiredness to shoot out energy. So a house like that is about putting out energy. I mean, there's many reasons why it won the jury award, but I think one of them is that it is a cauldron of energy. Energy shoots out of there when it's activated. That's the word you use, activating the space. It's an interesting conceptual piece when no one's swinging, but when the women are swinging, there is channeling going on. There's channeling into the future going on. There's channeling into the past. It was a convent. I assume some of you know the history of the house and have read something about it, but it has the sense of enclosure and openness to the world at the same time. Something that's opened up, that's revealed back in this wider Side Lab installation, the female space within the Side Lab installation. And to me, it's all about that challenging of energy and a transformation that happens, both in my own experience as I was swaying and when I was an audience member outside, just watching the energetic exchange that's going on and witnessing the performers' bodies reaching back and forth and up and down, higher ground. So it's a really cool experience. Thank you.
Lisa, do you want to add something?
No, not right now.
Okay.
I mean, it's lovely to hear about your experiences. Are there any questions, maybe? I mean, I know last night Jill and Craig were asking me, what is this piece about? Which is a natural question. But I think one of the things about performance art is to just say, this is about, it's not that straightforward, and that's part of what makes it so poetic. So to hear about that idea of experience is really crucial to understanding it.
Excuse me, Ms. Petra, what was that term that you used again for the
Durational?
Durational practice.
Durational practice.
Durational performance art. Durational art.
Well, and I think too, one of the interesting things about this piece, and a lot of pieces of the art prize, is that when you look at them, you don't immediately go to a place of disability, right? In fact, maybe none of you even thought about this as disability. And I think that's one of the things that we'd like to be able to share and model tonight too, is that bringing the disabled experience to the artwork, right, is one of the things that helps us gain more meaning. Now, if we go to the next piece, there are several examples of art in Art Prize that speak very directly to disability, right? This one by, is it Ty Dykema?
Ty Dykema.
Dykema, okay. We Can't Walk, So What? These are 3 portraits, a series of portraits, by a wheelchair user, a guy with muscular dystrophy, 3 portraits of his friends. If we go to the next slide, you can see all 3 of them. And here we have, again, what I might say is sort of explicitly disability narrative happening in the art. And I just want to give the panelists an opportunity to say anything about this. And then there's another explicit example of this sort of explicit narrative, but anything about these portraits?
Well, to me, these fit into two categories. One is just the history of portraiture.
Yeah.
And so, in a sense, this is this idea that the image is partly the likeness of an individual. Is one of them is the self-portrait? Is that right?
Yeah, no, actually, I don't
They're
think
not
so.
self-portraits,
No,
they're all,
no.
but he is a disabled, he
disabled
identifies
guy,
as
yeah,
disabled.
yeah.
But, so it's partly the likeness of the individual, but it's also this idea of how does the artist want the individual to be represented. And so sometimes in the history of portraiture, there's more information given. This is pretty much just a direct image of the face. And so then linking that with the other thing that's going on, this idea of disability art or identifying this as art that's representing disability, it's clear that he made a choice just to show the faces and not to show more of the body.
Right.
And I have mixed feelings about that, I guess, but I can see where the artist is trying to get the viewer to identify with a disabled person as a person. And so that focus just on the face. And maybe that seems self-evident, but within the history of portraiture, it's a very deliberate choice not to show these other kind of trademark or mainstream signs of a disabled person, like a wheelchair or a cane or, you know, the stuff.
Yeah.
So while it's not as mysterious or obscure as some other practices, I can see the artist's definite intention to send a message
Yeah.
through the use of the medium of portraiture.
And I do think the title is significant. You know, we don't walk. Well, we wouldn't know that from looking at these pictures, right? So yeah, and I think that's right. Because I myself have muscular dystrophy, and one very slight trait of that is a bit of a larger head. Now people tell me I have a big head all the time, but physically these people in me trigger muscular dystrophy. So that's something that I brought to these portraits. But again, maybe without the vent tube in the image on the far left, right? There's not a lot here triggering, right, disability. So I think that's it. I found that quite interesting. If you go to the next slide, some of you may have seen. Oh, do you want to talk? I'm sorry. Yeah. Sorry.
Well, just quickly, I mean, I think that this raises an interesting point that we've already touched on, but just the how do you enter into a piece, any artwork? Like, where is your personal entry point?
Yeah.
And if that's signified, if that's signaled somehow, like with this, where you have a narrative that is very specific that you're entering into, or what happens if you don't have that narrative and are inventing that narrative. And it's something with, for me in writing with poetry, something I am often playing within that tension of how explicit am I? Do I want to foreground that this is from a specific experience? Or do I want to allow more, or a different experience, more room for people to bring whatever they're bringing to it? So just that, you know, I always find it's interesting reading both titles and artist statements. You know, sometimes I'm like, oh, I wish I hadn't read the statement,
Right.
because I had something else going on for me that was totally different. So that, yeah. That's all.
Okay. This is a piece from the DeVos Center. Lisa, can you just read the title?
So the title is Empowerment Through Emily's Story, but then the title on the top of the poster is My Walker Does Not Define Me.
Again, this is an explicit piece. Would you like to talk about this, Petra?
Actually, rather than straight up talking about it, may I do something slightly different?
Yes, please do.
Thank you. I would just call upon the audience, if that's okay with you. You know, don't have to do this, but I would just love to look with you at this from a disability culture method. So one of the methods that we're using in disability culture is audio description. We're describing images to one another. Now, earlier on, when there were few of us in the room,
Yeah.
we did not have a good sense that anybody here is actually visually impaired. Is anybody in the room who would like to identify themselves as being visually impaired and who likes to? Okay, let us audio describe the images for you. Would you enjoy that? So what do you see here? I'm going to start out and then I'm going to ask other people in the audience to give their perspective on what is on the screen so that we can share amongst ourselves that we're all seeing differently. Everybody in this room has a different perspective on what's on the screen right now. And I think this is an intriguing image because we probably see slightly different things. So this is a predominantly gray and sort of pearl-colored image with a gray background. In front of this gray background stands a white woman who looks like she might be in her 20s, maybe. So a relatively young woman who is holding on to a walker, and the walker is sort of aluminium silver colored and has some pink accents. So there is some color on the walker. The walker goes around her. She's standing sort of in front of the area where you might normally sit down, and she's wearing an evening gown. She's wearing a black and white evening gown that looks as if lace is woven through it. She has auburn hair and she has facial makeup on. And now I'm going to invite you to tell me what her facial expression is. What's on her face? What do you actually see? Maybe I just hand this over, that's okay. And you don't have to do this. Please feel free to hand it on. I don't know how far this reaches either, but just see what you... Okay, well, first and second row, you are on.
Just the facial expression, what do you see? What's your feeling? Thank you.
So I think that this is a typical, she's confronting the viewer, so she's looking at you, looking at her, and I think that she also is kind of mid-smile. She's in the process of beginning to smile, and I also think something that might not have come through in your original description is that her attire is also formal. So.
Yeah.
Thanks, excellent. Someone else. We're just gathering 2 or 3 perspectives.
Are we still on the expression? Because to me she looks a little shy too, only because one shoulder is back and one is going forward, so she seems almost like she wants to do this confrontation or this looking directly at you, but she's also a little bit shy about it or thinking about it.
Thank you. Thanks. Do you have the same perspective on the emotion portrayed? You think the same thing?
I was thinking.
Do you mind taking it?
I was thinking more. She has a look of strength to me that is almost daring.
Yeah.
Like, what are you thinking about me? Just tell me, and I'll tell you what I think about that. Sort of a thought, I guess.
Very cool. Thank you. Anyone else? Front row?
I feel
Yes, thank you.
that she's actually thank you. I feel that when I see her face that she's actually attempting to strike a pose. That she's actually, that's her goal, is to strike some type of pose and hold that. So that's what I see.
Yeah, that's
Okay.
good.
Thank you. Okay, great. Now let's take it back.
Thank you everybody for being game to do this. And I think what you can see already is that there is a lot of richness. Oops, okay. There's a lot of richness in all of us seeing this. We see things slightly differently. We have different ways of reading each other's bodies, each other's minds, because we come from different experiences. Our way of reading another person's body language is very much defined by our own stories. And to me, that's one of the very powerful aspects of work like this, that we read quite a lot of different stories into that. And I'm always fascinated to find out what they are in a room. You know, if we actually had gone through the room, I bet we would have at this point 20 different narratives of what is going on inside this young woman. And of course, the young woman does not actually share it with us. We do not know what Emily exactly is going through at this moment. And that's one of the powerful aspects of this kind of photo portraiture. It's about bringing out from you what you are seeing and creating some kind of mirror relation between yourself and what is portrayed on the image. So this is a disability culture method of reading contemporary art practice. Thank you for that.
I would just add to, or just ask a question maybe of the audience and the panelists. The history of representations of disability are often haunted by the fact that it is disabled people being depicted by able-bodied people. In other words, there's more of the of self-description and self-representation now than there ever has been. But the history of art, for example, shows us the other way around, that it is the able-bodied perspective on the disabled body. And when I saw this, although I enjoyed it, and I think I enjoyed watching people look at it in the DeVos place, I also felt that because this is not per se an image generated by Emily herself, or it's called Emily's story, right? Or right? So there's some distance. I'm just, does that resonate?
A little bit about Bree.
Yeah,
Bree spoke. Can everybody hear me? Bree spoke during the DisArt Festival on one of our panels, and she actually identifies as having a disability.
Oh, really? Okay, good.
Yeah, so for
oh,
her
interesting.
empowerment through the body, the reason that she's doing this work of art, and she's been taking photos of different people because she became so offended by a plastic surgery billboard that she saw in Grand Rapids and said, I'm going to do something about this. People don't need to change who they are. So she does come from that perspective, and I don't know if that changes things as you look at it or not.
Yeah.
I just want to
Oh,
get
it
that
certainly
background.
does. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, when I first saw this, I was also looking at art that was up for the Paul Collins Art Award, I have to confess. And so I saw this piece, and it reminded me of poster child imagery. So I didn't actually look that carefully at it, and that was my bias. So this is, hearing the audio descriptions and looking at it a lot with more care has been good, because initially just the poster format, the poster of a disabled person, even though what she's doing is clearly appropriating that poster motif and then flipping it, which is great. But I saw it and it completely turned me off. So, and then you said, no, you have to look at it again. We talked about it. And then hearing the descriptions is actually immensely helpful.
Well, and the story too behind the artist, I think always,
Yeah,
How
but we
to
can't
balance all
always,
that,
I
right,
guess
of course,
what I'm
yeah.
torn about is we can't always access the artist's intention.
Sure.
And I'm not always sure, I don't know.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Okay, let's go to the next one.
Oh, yeah. This is the public museum.
This one was
Right,
the
this,
one.
yeah, outside,
Okay.
yeah.
So we just came from Ann Arbor yesterday, and last night we had the pleasure of walking in the evening around the Grand Rapids Public Museum, and we were actually looking for the hand, the fluttery hand pool. So in that discovery of walking around and being like, oh, it's not here, it's not here, it's not here, and circling, we came upon, this actually isn't a picture of the piece that we saw, but it's part of it in the series. So we saw a tree that had two branches with this fiber arts piece around it, and I just fell in love. The hands were just down the way, but I was like, oh, let's stop. We have to just hang out here for a bit. And for me, there was just something striking about.
Can you audio describe this?
Sure. Yeah.
Oh, perfect.
Yeah. So with this piece that we're looking at on the screen here, we have a large tree with 4 branches, and around the trees from the base up, there's a tapestry, a weaving of like a neutral color, kind of a off-white, raffia material that is woven like a woven basket around the base and up through the trunk, and then where it ends, there's a widening and the texture changes. The texture at the top becomes more wave-like. So that would be one audio description perspective. And you can be reciting your own in your head at the same time. But so coming across this piece, there was just something, I'm really drawn to pieces that work with the natural world and what's already there. So having this tree living with also natural fibers that are coming from the environment. For me, it was just a very protective gesture of just having this protective layer around the tree, and just the textures. It was a very visceral, I mean, I didn't go and touch because there's always that please do not touch, but there I felt the desire rise in me of wanting to touch and wanting to embrace this tree as well, because it was very much an embracing, a protection, kind of like the tree's nervous system maybe needed a little buffer, and this was the buffer, because that tree's been having so many people walk by, so.
Yeah, great. I love that piece. As we were searching for the waving up. Oops. What exactly is wrong? Do I need to hold this up?
It's just a loose.
Loose connection. Okay, got it.
Yeah.
I just got to keep pressure on it. We're good. Okay, so my response to it was a little bit different. I really enjoyed the piece, but I saw it. We had just seen before that in the Gram. We had seen Dylan Miner's Native Bikes. And for those of you who have seen that, this is a collection of youth bikes that are altered. And they are altered with the seven Anishinaabe wisdoms. So one of the local regional tribal people on whose lands we assemble here. So the Anishinaabe wisdoms are part of the seat arrangements. There's woven material, similar kind of woven material that extends between the handlebars of the bikes. There are flags that are streaming off those bikes. So they're sort of like badges of celebration of the survivance of Native culture. And really beautiful. I love that piece. I think it was one of the jury finalists, I think, Dylan's piece. Yeah. So I had just seen that. And I'd also seen quite a few other Native pieces in this particular art prize. So when I first saw that, that's what I was thinking about. Native culture and weaving, basket weaving as a particular skill, local skill here to Michiganic. And so for me, this had this feeling like a fish trap or a basket that is woven around the tree and that connects us to different ways of seeing the waterway here, of seeing, the river as a connecting place on the journey of Native peoples across this particular terrain. And I thought that was a really interesting reminder of survivance. Survivance is different from survival. Survival is something that you do usually by yourself. You survive, a group survive. It's not so much about agency. And survivance, which is a term by a Ojibwa, Anishinaabe intellectual, Jared Wisner, this term survivance points to something that has more agency, has more action in it, that you actually actively hold on to your stories, you actively hold on to your images, the images of your culture, to allow you to survive into a future. Okay, so do you see that difference between survival and survivance? It's just making it more active. So you don't just happen to survive, you actually do something quite active in acknowledging your elders, in acknowledging your stories, in keeping things alive. And that was for me such an important thing to take. I have no idea whether the artist had any intentions of doing this. This is once again audience fantasies, right? My fantasies because of what I'd seen on that day. But that concept of survivance is so important to me in disability culture. It's where I see a form of alliedom between Native struggle, Indigenous struggle, and disability struggle as we are building our own culture, as we are building how we are surviving into the future, as we are asserting our own agency. So it's one of those moments where I find that I can use a reading practice that comes out of one culture, I can acknowledge that respectfully, and use it as part of my own struggle too. So that is what happened for me as I was watching Grand Gathering.
Okay, let's go to the next one, and we'll move through a couple more here and then open it up for some conversation as well. This is, Lise, could you read that again? I'm sorry.
This is As Above by Judith Braun, and this was one of the public vote finalists in the two-dimensional category.
Mm-hmm. Do you want to give an audio description?
Sure.
For our audience?
What we're looking at as I'm seeing it is a photograph of two white walls and a white ceiling. We're facing the corner where the walls and ceiling meet. And the two walls are covered with black patterns that are symmetrical. And the patterns are made up of curving and flowing lines that form shapes that look like flowers, and they look like stars, and they emanate from the corner and then flow outward to the edges in kind of a concentric circular pattern on either side.
So this, when we arrived yesterday, this was one of the first pieces that we saw. And for me, well, actually, Lisa was talking about seeing the artist in action of creating this. And I just loved just the idea of community involvement or witnessing of the piece being created. Because sometimes I feel like sometimes I see artwork and I'm like, ooh, I have no idea what those materials are or how this person did this. But just to actually, the physicality of the work, to have that as part of the work, I really enjoy. And also the temporality of charcoal, like knowing that that's not going to stay, as far as I know, that those walls will be washed off, and that it's charcoal. It's something that isn't necessarily permanent. So I was intrigued by that, as well as that she wasn't using necessarily her elbows or her arms to do it. It was all from fingertips, and just that uniqueness of everyone's fingertips being different, of leaving a mark that's solely her own in this piece. And as we were discussing this, Petra said, well, how would you relate that to disability culture? And I immediately thought about another piece that I saw this past year that's also done in charcoal, that's quite different.
Let's skip ahead 2 slides and we'll see that, yeah.
Okay, so before I talk more, I'll just audio describe a bit. So this is a piece that's called Abilify, and it's by a Thai-American artist, Chanaka Svetvelis. And in this photo, we have in charcoal on a white wall, which also has an electrical socket with a white tube going across as a 3-dimensional item. We have on the wall with a woman standing in front holding what could be a newspaper, but it's actually the medication guide to the medication Abilify. And then written are all of a whole description from the medication guide with side effects and risk of death and all kinds of other things. So that's a quick audio description. And so in this piece, Chanaka, while people were in the space, she also was working on this in charcoal, writing up the whole medication guide of Abilify. And Chanaka identifies as living with bipolar disorder, and she chose charcoal because I've had this experience myself. For people overdosing and whatnot, activated charcoal is often what's used to put in the stomach to absorb whatever poisons are there. So I thought that was, just particularly effective in this piece. So that was my, that was my link with also White Wall and
Lisa?
One of the things that I reflected on with this work is also, and we see this with several other works with the hands that we'll talk about, and even Higher Ground, that to me one of the things that was very moving about this is that at one point she was here doing what we're seeing in the photograph. This is a photograph of the same work by Judith Braun, but she's working on it, so we see her hands on the wall. When she's no longer there, it's as if we very strongly have the sense of her presence still in the space, because the wall is covered with the marks of the very intimate mark of her fingers. And I think Higher Ground also has this sense that even when no one is swinging on those swings, we are very conscious of the absent bodies that should be there. And I think there are a number of pieces that I've seen at this Art Prize that have this sense of absent presence. Mm-hmm. And so there are different sides to me that resonate with disability arts in that way. One of them is that I think often when we're looking for a body that's not there, we project an ideal body. Mm-hmm. But in fact, especially with a number of these pieces, the body that's not there is not sort of the ideal perfect body, but it's a regular mortal body with difference. So in Judith Braun's case, she's very tiny and she wears glasses, so she has a different body. And I think there's something about the absences of the bodies that's very moving. We miss their lack or something. I haven't formulated that perfectly, but I think that's where I connected to this in terms of disability art.
Let's go to the next one and then actually get to a point. We will audio describe for our audience member that needs that. But then I'd like to see, if it's okay with the panelists, what the audience is seeing now that you've heard a little bit of this, the things that we're looking for. So. Lisa, or who hasn't audio described yet? Yes.
This image is a drawing, I believe. It's a painting. Is it a painting or a drawing? Anyone know? It's a painting.
Can you say the title?
The painting is called Eternal Waking by Christina Mezuk. And the dominant colors are dark green on the outer edges, getting lighter towards a figure, a white-skinned figure in the center of the image. So the color scheme goes from dark green to middle green to near yellow around the actual skin of a person who is crouching, one foot and knee below her and one sort of stretched out in front of her so that her spine has a curve. It's like a C on the canvas. The figure is identified as a female figure mainly through the breast area, the slimness of the waist. It has this sense of an idealized female figure, but also through a hairdo, which is like a black bob that covers the face. And that has these ragged edges that kind of encase the face like a helmet. And the figure itself is naked, but has flowers growing of various orifices. So there are all kinds of openings that look like, not quite like wounds, but like rock that might have fallen out of a rock cliff. So that's the kind of feeling I'm getting. It's not a wet wound, it's a form of dry, earthy wound in between rock and earth. So these openings are there, and various kinds of plants are emerging from the body. In the back, it's like an ivy creeping downwards, and there's also a few plants that are in the actual landscape. The landscape has no particular features. It's an abstract background, but we have two plants emerging from that abstract background. And the figure is holding also two flowers in her hand, and we see the root system of those flowers as if she just plucked them out, either her own or the surroundings.
Can you go to the detail on the next slide, Jill? Thanks.
Okay, and here's a detail of the back of the body, which, so we see that ivy-like structure that I described earlier, that emerges from the upper back. And we see near the thigh bone of the figure something, could that actually be an insect? I can't quite see it from here. It's an insect. It looks like, yeah, so it's the one feature of the painting that's neither human nor a plant, but it looks like maybe an ant or a cockroach or something.
Actually, I think it is a plant.
It is a plant.
I think it's emerging.
Oh, okay.
An emerging plant. Okay, so we see that moment of a dry opening in the skin. So it has this feeling of, as I said, like rock crackling rather than a wound. And yeah, shadow and light define the creature. Do you?
Reactions from the audience. Who would like to react here?
What do you see?
Yeah, John. Can you talk just real loud?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
I guess when I first look at that and I look at the material of the body and thinking about what it might be made of, I think porcelain almost. That reminds me, and thinking of that, porcelain dolls along with that possibility of porcelain vases as well. Those connections inspire different thoughts out of me.
Yeah.
Any other responses?
I look at it two different ways. It's a painting of a stone sculpture that's inventive and clever somewhere, that's made to house plants with maybe a wig on top of it. Is one way that I first kind of try to deal with this uncomfortable feeling of plants growing out of my body. And then I thought, oh, maybe it's not actually a body, and that made me feel better.
Yeah.
Active audiences.
Yeah, exactly.
I think it's really interesting that the plants are thriving when they're connected to the body, but they are not as they've come off of it. So you see the plants that are kind of on the floor surface are starting to wilt or are already dead and decaying. And it also looks like she's actively removing them from herself, and you see pieces of her body that have been pulled out and then placed around her on the ground with parts of the flowers dying.
Maybe it speaks to resilience with but I noticed too that the wilting that you had mentioned, maybe that's what I see is some resilience there, that the growth is still continuing.
Yeah.
And isn't it interesting how, when we have no further information about the painting, how interesting different responses we're getting about resilience, about, again, survival, about the marble sculpture. This active audience gaze is so exciting, and sometimes it's hard to know when to feed in what you can read in the audiencing notes, because if you go to the artist's notes, you get quite a different story.
Right.
And I really find myself hesitating even telling it, right?
Yeah.
But it is an important story still. The reason why this artist, what she writes about her own journey towards this painting is that she found herself in a situation where her body, was it after after medication, developed hives all over. So she developed these hives. It was a terrible experience for her, and no one knew quite what to do with that one. So this body was taking on its own agency. You know, there was a body that was erupting. And the way she writes about it feels a bit like some of these, you know, horror movies where the body is erupting, body horror going on.
Right.
And so this image is a way of working with those sensations. But look at how interesting our own responses to the image are, and how we're seeing something quite different from body horror.
Yeah.
Quite different from, you know, hives all over.
Yeah.
We have very different kinds of readings, and readings that extend quite a lot of tenderness towards the image, and that I think is also located within the image, and the tenderness of the colors, the way that the plants are spreading. So she speaks in a very different way about what's going on with her than the way that she speaks in her artist statement. Right?
And was this the one where it also came from her dream? I'm not positive. If I remember, she had a reaction of hives to a medication and then had a dream of these plants growing from her body, which is interesting to me as far as sources for work of the body, and, you know, depending on your perspective from dreaming the unconscious and how that's translated, and how the body translates into different spaces.
There are many more images that we have to look at, but I'm wondering if this is a good time for questions for the panelists or thoughts about what you've been seeing. We're going to go to about 8:15 or so, but so I want to make sure that we have time for conversation, right?
Just open it up.
Yeah, let's just open it up. Yeah.
I stepped away at the end of looking at Judith Braun's piece, but one thing that's interesting in the Art Prize discussion around that is that her work is, the general public perhaps doesn't value it as much because they know that she was there for 2 weeks and created this thing, and so it doesn't have the size of, you know, the amount of time or effort, the scale that other pieces might have, and there's this disregard of the fact that what you're seeing is not just one of Judith Braun's work, you're seeing her life. She spent her life developing this craft, and wherever she goes, she has the ability to rather quickly create these pieces. I mean, it still took her 2 weeks to do this work, but and to me it brings up those ideas of right now I'm temporarily able-bodied, and you know, Judith Braun, at some point, like, there will be a time where her work, where she won't be able to create this work anymore. And to me, that's a really powerful connection to you know, my own mortality, to a powerful connection to my friends who are disabled, because I know I will be there, or maybe I'll, you know, the only way that I won't is not a better story.
Right.
So I don't really have any question or comment beyond that, but that was a really strong element for this piece for me.
Thanks, Tom. Thank you.
Certainly changed my perspective on it already. 30 seconds later, I'm looking at it a little differently.
Beautiful.
Other questions, comments? Just from your own other experiences with Art Prize that maybe were triggering some thoughts about.
I have a question for you guys.
If you're not asking us, I'll ask you. Hopefully all of you had a chance to at least walk through some of the amazing exhibits that are around here. And I would just love to hear, are there any particular installations, sculptures, paintings, performances, videos that activate your memory either of yourself and your own body stories, or of relatives and their body stories? I think it's a pretty broad question. I bet most of you have an answer to that one. Think about, is there something that you saw and that really spoke to you at the level of the somatic? And the somatic means the body, you know, the body memory. Some of those things that we saw here, the figure that's holding herself, you know, which is in that place between hives and dreams and growth. So those kinds of moments that might, or we started out with our body memories of being hospitalized, right? So are there any particular pieces that you saw that specifically addressed you in that way, a very visible way, rather than intellectually?
Yes, do you mind speaking into this?
So I responded to the Abilify piece. You were speaking about the charcoal with the various descriptions of how the side effects can affect the body. And the way I responded to that, specifically somatically, is, thinking about the ways that I medicate myself through various ways, and the way that it's not effective, it seems. So even if it's not an identified disability, it may be a struggle or a challenge or a daily sort of problem you have. My child has terrible allergies. We try to medicate it every day, and it doesn't work, right? And so every time I've seen a disability, or identified disability or some sort of struggle be medicated, the way I somatically respond to it is it always seems to fall short. And I responded to the way that this charcoal is it's messy, right? And it's all over the place as far as risk. And so I think my 4.5-year-old son could speak to this as he struggles to breathe at night. So that was my somatic response.
Thank you.
Thanks. Let's move on to someone else. Thank you for sharing.
So the higher grounds one, the first one, is when I was, between ages of 2 and 5, my parents were the missionaries for this church, and I lived in that neighborhood. And I lived in the house that was on Franklin, that was had a grid over it, the black grid.
Yeah.
And my father just died in October, it'll be a year. And so thinking, first of all, viscerally about my father and about him just walking through those spaces of being at the church. And he was an artist. He did a lot of art at the church, and he did art on the buildings on Granville, and it was painted over about 5 years ago. And then to see that mural, because my dad did a mural on the outside, and so it was really cool to see that piece. And then there's like 5 layers to this story. But anyway, so some not so nice things happened on those grounds there that changed our family's trajectory, and specifically mine and some of my siblings' lives, and actually incidences that gave them a disability and that they struggle with now, always trying to rise above that. And the struggle of us as a family with our spirituality, with the Catholicism of getting on your swing and swinging, and following the rules and doing the same thing, right? And not engaging other spiritualities, not engaging other methods, just being on this swing. And so that spoke to me a lot. And then there was this piece of joy, because Dave and I first started dating, he lived there. and we became engaged when he was living there. And the house that he was living in is torn down, but it's the empty lot that's in between the church and the other. So and there's just so much more in that space that viscerally really, I was thinking today about how the smell of all of it was at times just so repugnant. Like I couldn't breathe. It was trying to steal the breath from me, and just struck so many memories So it was this sort of push and pull all at the same time, opening and closing. Yeah, it was just really, it was something. So.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
You know, I wonder if during Art Prize, if the general audience member, the general looker, reacts intellectually first or physically first. You know, and I think your question really brings that up as a form of disability criticism, right? To let that body reaction be the primary or the first or the very important one. I think that's really interesting. I find that I go to a physical reaction when I see the grotesque first. So could you go forward, Jill, several until you see the body of a woman with a deer on her head? I don't think I've ever said that sentence. Would never say that sentence anywhere else. There. I don't know how many of you saw this. Dear Diary. I'll give a brief audio description. There are 3 panels. One on the left is yellow background. The other 2 are white background. And this is a really weird one to audio describe. In the panels we have what looks like the legs and bottom part of a female body wearing red and white striped socks, on top of which the rest of the body is a deer body, a deer head, but without arms, without hooves or limbs of any kind. In the far right, the deer head is aiming upwards. In the middle, it's sagging down as if a dead carcass. And on the left, which I can't see very well here, it's the same, sort of flopped over, again, to me, mimicking what you might see hanging off the back of a Ford truck during deer season, right? When I saw this picture, I sat with this picture for about 10 minutes, and the physical reaction to it was very powerful for me, because for whatever reason, the grotesque nature of these images, the sort of carnal nature, somehow spoke to the carnal part of all of us. That is the parts of our bodies that are not the parts that are public, but rather the parts that are hidden or kept in corners of our ability to be public. I sat with the paintings for about 10 minutes and watched people watching it. And their reactions were just that. They were physical. They were literally, or one kid was like, you know, like, so, and I love that because, again, it is that immediately going to the physical that, again, I just sort of enjoy. But, so anyway, yeah, just wanted to see if that resonated. Or other experiences that you've had?
Yeah.
I have an experience that resonates with. I did a little bit of the swinging for the higher ground piece.
Yeah.
And I noticed kids would see me and they'd like first be like, oh, like swinging, and there's like joyfulness and just kind of most people could see their eyes like lit up, and then all of a sudden you could tell that once they started thinking about it, they didn't understand. But why are they swinging like this, and why is this art? So I guess it was just something that I observed today and was thinking about that, watching people process the work.
Thank you.
I'm glad that you posed the question about,
Do you mind if someone holds the mic for you, or you hold the mic?
if you'd like.
Because I think we will hear you better. Thank you.
Well, I've spoken quite a bit.
That's okay.
I'm glad that you posed the question about, what was the word that you used about the body?
Somatic.
Somatic. And Jill, if you could go to that piece with the gal about empowerment through Emily's story, where she's with the gal with the walker. That I guess that when I looked at it, this is my first experience with it, and in just looking at it, I kind of wanted to glaze over it, because I see her, is it an attempt on her part to cover the obviousness of that walker that stands out? And for myself, I'm going through transitions with the cane and when a chair is appropriate and that type of thing. And I guess I just noticed, she's wearing pearls in this lovely gown, and I'm wondering how comfortable she is, and is there really an attempt, or if she's thinking of, am I covering up the shell, and how is that projecting onto others? Am I really look like I am dressed for an engagement? Is this walker still the number one thing that is visible to others?
That's great, thank you. I'm going to ask one more question of each of the panelists, and then we're going to wrap it up. But so if we could have the microphone. Oh, you want to talk, Dave? Sorry. Did you want to?
I did. Just for one quick second, because following up on what Dave said, it's that when we were talking earlier, her look, where my walker does not define me, and to me her look is, and neither do you. And kind of a little bit of a smirk, pride, whatever to it. And then if you squint real hard and read it, and some of the things that just...
Want me to read it?
No, I mean, I want to get to the panel, but I mean, because part of the panel is in what Petra said about, the survivance of the disability community, and what does that really mean, and what are those layers? When Melissa said the 4, 5, 6 layers, because layer to this, we get, in the middle there, the line is, my challenge is just more obvious than yours. It's like, well, her walker is probably not her only challenge, and I don't have a walker, but I got other challenges, and somehow singular. It's like, oh, Chris, your only challenge is that wheelchair, and other than that, your life's fine. Other than probably giving up smoking. But we won't say that in public that you still smoke, because people will then think you're a Neanderthal. But anyways, it's just that idea of what is this survivance of the disability community, and definitions, and diving into those layers. So thanks.
Thank you for outing me.
Sorry. Did I see you smoke?
No, sorry.
I'll keep like that for you.
The tagline of DisArt is that we are trying to challenge perceptions of disability one piece of art at a time. And I just wondered if you all could talk about why you believe art has that potential to challenge and change perceptions of disability or anything. I wonder if you just, a couple words from each of you, and then we'll wrap it up.
Okay. Well, to me, what we've been doing today in this room together is a form of enacting what I think disability art is about, which is to open up those layers that Dave spoke about, to think about the layering that goes into the ways we identify ourselves and the ways we identify others. We've just spent some time together looking at a number of images and practices and peeled back some of these layers, thought about some of the complexities that are in them. And that's, for me, what makes disability art so fascinating. what makes it such a good place and curious place to hang out in, because it's a place where oftentimes these multiple meanings collide. You know, you have often one story that's projected onto bodies and minds like ours, and then you have art practices that engage with multiple layers, multiple onion skins of meanings, and that is what makes it so rich and interesting to me.
So just adding on to that, I think with art and in disability culture, it's a lot about different ways of being in the world and different ways of representing oneself as far as when you're looking at art. And just as far as just like when you're with someone new and you get to know them, and getting to know them maybe opens up different ways of thinking or being for you, that with this leaning in to each other and you know, figuring out what everyone's sensibilities are within a disability culture, using art for that, having a physical, for me coming from a dance background, that somatic experience, having an experience, whatever that experience is, and then having a community like the Desarts Festival to discuss and to talk and to have an exchange, have some kind of communication. Just communication in various ways.
Yeah, and to me, I think it goes back to what Petra was talking about the somatic and also durational experience. There's an artist who became active in the 60s and then became really prominent in the 80s and 90s as a conceptual artist, Hans Hake. And he said the problem with a lot of our practices in Western culture is we act as if we're, I'm paraphrasing a little bit, we act as if we're a bunch of heads floating 5.5 feet off the ground, right? We only relate, we act as if we're separated from the rest of us because our knowledge is all held in our words and in our heads, and we act as if our knowledge doesn't actually predominantly come from everything else. And I think that's what art has the potential to do, is to awaken a kind of knowing that's not just activated from our head knowledge, but that it has the potential to activate our knowing, like we were doing audio describing and talking about sense memory and association, that art can do that in such a powerful way if we allow ourselves to be open to that.
Well, thank you, Lisa and Stephanie and Petra, for being here and just helping us think about this stuff. And thank you, everybody, for coming. And keep looking differently. Okay. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you later. Yeah.